Welcome to our first compliance panel. We're very excited to go ahead and get this started to kind of answer some of the industry questions right now geared around compliance. With me today, I've got Fred Gooch and his team of compliance experts. Can I call you guys experts in compliance? Fred?
However far out on a limb you want to start.
So we've got, I'll just say some names real quick. We've got Anne-Marie, Adelina, we've got Amanda, Daniel, and Tad with us today to answer some compliance questions. There is a question submission portal on GoToWebinar. If you do have any questions, you're more than welcome to submit those. We did have some preloaded questions from some people that came in before the webinar, so we're going to go ahead and answer those before we get to any of the live questions. Those were submitted before the webinar started, so we'll go ahead and start with those, and Fred, I'm just going to go ahead and turn it over to you.
All right. Thanks, David. So we're going to go ahead and start going through the list of pre-submitted questions, and we've got different compliance specialists and attorneys here at Docutech who have looked over these questions. Actually, a lot of them, you know, as we tend to get quite frequently, are questions that kind of fall into gray areas of the reg or areas where the reg isn't really well defined, and so we'll have some discussion about that. So, question number one, how is Docutech disclosing TRID second mortgages tied to the first mortgage in order to get the cash to close to balance? And then it says, are they disclosing the amount from the first in the summaries of transactions, and if so, on what line? And so Daniel Royce is going to answer this question.
Thanks for setting it up by talking about the gray area of the law, because we stepped right into it. The CFPB clarified in one of their earlier webinars on how to handle this, and they said that this should fall under Section 38 J2(6) of the reg, where it should be under other credits. At the same time they answered that question, they referenced Appendix H, Form 25C, which then lists the loan described in the previously mentioned regulation, but they put it in a different area of the summary of transactions. So they describe it having listed in section the already paid buyer on behalf of borrower at closing in line L4. That's what you'll find in Appendix H, 25C, but they describe it in the reg as listing it under other credits or line L6. Either way, the math should work as long as you're putting the sales price in and all of the other fees, the cash to close should balance. For the second part of that question, should you list the price of the first loan on the second? We believe that the reg directs that you should, and that's the only way the cash to close is going to balance at the end.
Okay, so I mean, this is an interesting...
I'm just going to stop for 1 second. We did have a question come through. Should I see something on my screen? The compliance panel, we're just going to be doing audio, so there's actually no visuals for today, so you shouldn't be seeing anything on your screen, just our audio coming through. So go ahead, Fred.
Okay, so back to the question here. This is an interesting section here because you've got really the form seems to conflict with what we've got in the regulation, right?
Correct.
And so generally, what's our approach there when we find the form that conflicts with the text of the reg?
What we try to do is take a conservative approach and make sure that the manner in which we're interpreting it, we get the end result we're looking for. In this case, it both, by putting it either in L4 or L6, the math works, and either would be technically compliant with the regulation and the guidance given by the CFPB. So we believe it can go either place and remain compliant, and there's not one correct answer in this case, which is the gray area that we find ourselves in a few of these questions.
Yeah, the other thing that I found interesting is you look at the model form here, the only value that populates on the model form for this particular transaction is the amount, right, of the first?
Yeah, it does list, you know, the loan amount in the title of the loan, and then it lists the actual proceeds of the loan. So you'll see that that 25C lists the loan amount as $100,000 in parentheses in the title of it, and then it lists, I think, 96.5, assuming that there was the cost of financing the loan or something, but that's the amount that's actually being paid down as part of the second, paying down the first. So not as clear as I would have hoped, but I believe that we do have a sufficient answer that we shouldn't get ourselves or anyone else in any trouble. How's that?
Right, right. I think that this is a classic example. Well, I just actually today got an email from the CFPB stating that they're going to be doing a webinar specific to construction loans under TRID, which is going to give us some really good guidance. But this is, in my mind, just another example of where if we could get some more examples from the CFPB that are really particular to some of these difficult situations under the reg, it would be very, very useful to us in industry that are just, we're trying to comply with the reg.
Yeah, and unfortunately, there's a level of clarity that's assumed that's in the reg that isn't coming across in the practical application of it. So what we're trying to do is remain compliant until we get further clarification. And fortunately, as Fred said, we're asking those questions and looking for that guidance. And until then, we're doing just like everyone else out there. We're doing the best we can with the information that we have so far.
Yep. Great. Thanks, Dan. We're going to move on to a question here for Anne-Marie. This has to do with delivery of the closing disclosure on federal holidays, actually. So this is an interesting question. It says, if an LE is sent out and received electronically on a federal holiday, can the CD still go out the next business day? And if the CD is e-signed on a holiday, do we still count the next business day as day one? For example, if the initial CD was e-signed on Monday the 18th, Martin Luther King Day, is the loan still able to close on Thursday the 21st? And so Anne-Marie's taking a look at this one for us.
Thanks, Fred. What we need to identify in this question is, first of all, whether or not the LE was actually received on the federal holiday. Because if there isn't any proof that the LE has been received that day, then you would still have to do the 3-day waiting period before you would be able to disclose the CD afterwards. But if we assume that the LE was received electronically on a federal holiday, now we need to determine the business day rule to see if you would be able to send the CD out the next day. And the business day rule means that a business day is defined as a day on which the creditor's offices are open to the public for carrying on substantially all of its business functions. So if the creditor is open on Martin Luther King Day and sends out this LE electronically, and it is proved to be received electronically on that day, if all of those elements have been satisfied, then yes, you would be able to send the CD out the very next day. For the second question, discussing the e-signature of the CD, this changes a little bit because the disclosure rules for CDs don't use the regular business day definition. They use the more specific business day definition, which means that all calendar days are considered business days, except for Sundays and legal public holidays. So in instances where the creditor's offices are open on a federal holiday, this would not apply in this instance. That day cannot be considered a business day. So the CD, even if it is signed and verified on that federal holiday, your countdown could not begin on that day. You would have to go on the next business day. So that would be Monday the 19th, the day after Martin Luther King Day. So you would have to count out the 20th, the 21st, and the 22nd. So you wouldn't be able to close on Thursday the 21st. You would be able to close on Friday the 22nd.
Yeah, and this is an interesting one too, because there's language in the reg, and I'm trying to remember the exact section. It's like 3084, somewhere in there, where it talks about that you can't provide the CD, a revised LE and the CD on the same day. But it just says day. It doesn't specify whether you're talking about a business day or just a regular day. So it seems like you could receive the CD, you could receive the CD or the LE on the holiday, and then provide the document the next day, but you still couldn't count the holiday towards your timing requirements for consummation, right?
Right.
Yeah, it's kind of interesting that it just says day in there. It doesn't specify whether it's a business day or not. We have a follow-up question that's come in here. It says, what if the LO is just working on that day, but the creditor is closed for the holiday? I think that depends on which document you're dealing with. On the LE, you have a creditor-specific business day definition that talks about the days that the creditor is open for substantially all of its business operations. And so you need to be very careful about who's able to work and who's able to submit to deliver documents, because I'm guessing that if you have LOs that are regularly working on that day, that it's going to count. Just assuming that auditors from the CFPB or whatnot are going to construe the regulation in favor of the consumer. That would be my best guess there. However, if you're dealing with the specific business day, then it just depends on whether it is a federal holiday or a Sunday.
Yeah, that's the only thing that matters when you're dealing with the specific business day rule.
Yep. We also had a follow-up question come in on the question that Daniel was answering on the simultaneous seconds, and it says, can I confirm the first answer was the direction to disclose a second lien on the first lien CD L6 other credits?
That's exactly the direction that the regulation gives. So I would say yes, in response to that question, and appreciate the follow-up question and clarification on that.
Okay, thanks, Daniel. Now we're going to move to another question. The next one we're going to send over to Amanda. And this is another interesting question. It says, if a broker submits the incorrect settlement provider list, the 10% bucket services not included, what is the lender-creditor recourse/solution if this is not discovered until closing?
This one, it's a hard question. If a broker issues any disclosure in place of the creditor is still responsible for that disclosure. So if the wrong settlement list is provided to the borrower, it would have to be treated as if they were not allowed to shop for that item, and it would have to fall within the 10% tolerance cure.
Yeah, I think you're right there. It's this whole idea that the reg places the responsibility for the content and the delivery disclosures on the creditor. And so if somehow the broker was to give the consumer the wrong settlement service provider list, right? Maybe they are dealing with several different creditors, right? And they give the wrong list that was for another creditor, then you almost have to assume that list was provided blank. And so everything then becomes a third-party fee that the borrower can't shop for, and de facto 10% tolerance.
Right.
You there, Amanda?
Yeah, you would assume that they did not shop for that service because technically they didn't.
Okay. Okay, so we're going to go on to our next question, and this is another one for Anne-Marie. It says, based on the TRID regs, is your understanding that the person that is only on title get a copy of the CD only in a rescindable transaction or on all transactions?
And what this question boils down to is what the definition of consumer is. And in Reg Z, consumer means a natural person to whom consumer credit is offered extended. However, for purposes of rescission, the term also includes a natural person in whose principal dwelling a security interest is or will be retained or acquired, if that person's ownership interest in the dwelling is or will be subject to the security interest. So what we found here is that yes, anyone who has their interest in the title, they're the ones who get the CD. But if you have like a non-purchasing spouse, then for purposes of rescission, because they have a security interest in the principal dwelling, they would receive the CD only for rescindable transactions. And because of this definition of consumer, if you have an inter vivos trust, whoever is applying for the credit on behalf of the trust would also receive a copy of the CD. And if it's a rescindable transaction, the settlor of the trust would be listed on the CD. So I don't know if I made that as clear as mud, but basically only people on title receive the CD unless it's a rescindable transaction, and then anyone who has a security interest would also receive it in that instance.
So we've got another question here that's we're actually going to direct towards Tad. And this question came through, says, where should escrow holdbacks be located on the CD?
Thank you for that. Now, escrow holdbacks, they should be placed in section N of the CD. The reg that controls this is 102638 K2V III, which states a description and amount of any and all other obligations required to be paid by the seller at the real estate closing, including any lien-related payoff, fees, or obligations. Now, at first glance, this doesn't seem to fit escrow holdbacks, as these are required to be paid by the seller at closing. However, the CFPB did address this, and in the official interpretation for paragraph 38 K2V III number 3, they titled this one, Escrows Held by Closing Agent for Payment of Invoices Received After Consummation. And the interpretation reads, funds to be held by the closing agent for the payment of either repairs or water, fuel, or other utility bills that cannot be prorated between the parties at closing because the amounts used by the seller prior to closing are not yet known, must be disclosed under 102638 K2 V III. So this is exactly what an escrow holdback is that it is funds to be held by the closing agent for payment of repairs after closing. And so according to the interpretation, the holdbacks would fit under 102638 K2 V III and should be placed in section N of the CD.
Okay, so we've got some more questions in here. It looks like I may have misspoke when I was talking about tolerances. If the borrower is not allowed to shop, not permitted to shop, it's a 0 tolerance, not a 10% tolerance, and I probably just misspoke there, so I've got a couple questions about that. And then we have got a question now about principal reduction, which is another interesting area of the reg. It's not really specified. So the question is, where should a principal reduction be placed on the CD? Prior guidance on this subject was provided by MBA stating section K. So I've actually, this isn't directly addressed in the reg, and I have seen the MBA and the CFPB give differing answers based on the question that's been asked at different times. And so I've seen 3 different approaches here, and it's not clearly specified in the regs, so this is just what we're seeing out there in the industry right now. One would be in section L, and it would be as a paid outside of closing, kind of inside the columns in the other credit section. Another option would be in line L4 of the CD, and then also another approach would be in the amounts due from the borrower in section K. And each of these approaches kind of has a different problem associated with it. If you put it in section K, it needs to be a negative amount. If you put it inside of section L, inside of the columns, then it would throw off your cash to close because it would show that the borrower is going to, it wouldn't be accounted for in the calculation. It would show that the borrower was getting more cash back. And that could be okay as long as you have a way to notify the borrower that they're not really getting that cash back because some of that cash is being applied to a principal reduction. The way that seems to make the most sense mathematically is inside the columns in section L on the CD, but the issue there is that in the column, it calls for amounts that are already paid by or on behalf of the borrower at closing. And really, this isn't an amount that has been paid by the borrower before closing. It's kind of being paid at closing. So that seems to be a little bit not quite right either. And I don't think that there's an exact best way to do this. If I had my preference, it seems that section L in the column makes the most sense because it's mathematic, because it comes out mathematically correct in the cash to close. And then there's another issue that arises here is that if you're using the alternative CD for a refinance, there is no summaries of transactions, so none of these would apply. And some of the answers that we've been giving to clients when they say, well, what should we do in this circumstance? Well, the best answer has been to simply use a standard CD, but you can find yourself in a situation where you gave an LE using the alternative table, and then the regulation requires you to use a CD with the alternative table. So the most logical place to put it is in the payoffs and payments table, but the language of the reg states that the payoffs and payments table is for amounts paid to third parties, and this isn't an amount paid to a third party. So it seems like we've got kind of a problem there. But also, Freddie Mac in their Uniform Closing Dataset FAQ that was updated in January of 2016 says that you can go ahead and put it in the payoffs and payments table. So I think that we're going to see industry, at least in this instance, Fannie Mae, or in this instance Freddie Mac and possibly Fannie Mae following along, directing industry to put it in the payoffs and payments table. So we could see that on the alternative form.
So it looks like we've got a couple more questions that have come through, and we're getting pretty close to ending our webinar for the day. So we're going to go ahead and look at these questions, and we will actually send out a Q&A sheet on these questions. I don't know that we can get to all of these today, so we'll send out a follow-up sheet to everyone who attended today in a quick email that lets you download a PDF version of the questions. That will either come out this week or early next week. And then we encourage you to submit those questions before our next compliance panel webinar. It's good for us to be able to look over those and to be able to answer those for you on the next one. The next one will actually be on March 2nd at 10 a.m. Mountain Standard Time. So we hope to see everyone there, and we will go ahead and wrap up. Is there anything else you wanted to add, Fred?
Nope, we do have some questions that have been submitted here that we probably are going to need to take a little bit of time to research, because I don't want to answer those right off the cuff if they're a little bit down in the weeds. So what we'll do is we'll take a look at these questions. We'll make sure that we get an answer back to you, and then we can share the answers on the next compliance panel, as we're going to be doing these regularly just to take questions and answers from you. And as always, if you ever have any questions about compliance, go ahead and submit them through your account manager to through the TaskWatch system here at Docutech, and those get funneled into our legal department. Or we also have an email address, legal@docutech.com. We've dropped the corp. You can just go straight to legal@docutech.com, and that'll go into our legal and compliance team as well, and we'll go ahead and answer your questions and do our best to continue to work our way through the fallout that we have from TRID. It seems like almost all of our questions are still related to TRID, and we'll keep plugging away and hopefully getting some more clarification from CFPB, and as we see more generally accepted industry practices, we'll be adopting those into our systems and sharing those as well. So thanks for attending our webinar today.
Yeah, and thank you so much, Fred, to you and your team for answering those questions, and a big thanks to everyone for attending today, and we'll look forward to answering more of your questions related to compliance, and we will see you on the next webinar. Thanks so much.